Champaign County Agriculture Today with your host, Dennis Riggs.
Hello and welcome to Champaign County Agriculture Today. My name is Dennis Riggs, your host for the next few minutes as we address some of the issues of agriculture and how it affects you as a consumer of agricultural products. I know you've probably heard on the news over the past few months about a lot of talk in Washington, D.C. about the Farm Bill. You say, well, a farm bill, that must just be all for farmers. It must not have anything to do with me as a consumer, both in energy and or food. But I will like to differ with you and hopefully explain how today you will be involved in that farm bill and you'll understand how the decisions made in Washington, D.C. about the farm bill will affect you. Today in our program, we're very happy to have a couple of guests that will expand upon what the Farm Bill is about and why it affects each one of us, all the consumers of agricultural products, energy, food, and fiber right here in the United States. We'll start out today, and we'd like to welcome to our table Mr. Bob Thompson. Bob, glad to have you with us today. You're the chair, endowed chair of the Agricultural Policy Department of the U of I. Tell us what that is about and how long you've been in that position.
I've been in the position 4 years now. It's a position that has a lot of extension public policy education involved. I teach the undergraduate course on agricultural policy and also lead some research for graduate students also on policy, but principally looking at agricultural policy and agricultural trade policy.
Give me a little background. Have you come from this area originally, or where did you grow up at?
I grew up on an upstate New York dairy farm, but after graduating from Cornell, went to Purdue for my graduate work and joined the faculty there, stayed there 20 years, was in Washington a couple of times, but back to Purdue. And but 4 years ago, I had been at the World Bank, and I'd left the bank, and this new endowed chair came along, and here we are back in the Midwest, and really enjoying being back in the Midwest.
Very good. Well, it sounds like a lot of great grassroots experience, both locally and in Washington, D.C. to help head that program over at the University of Illinois. Thanks for being with us today. Also on our program today is Mr. Ron Warfield. Ron, a farmer from up in the Gibson City area, and I understand you spend some time at the University of Illinois yourself, Ron.
I have. I've really enjoyed the last 3 or 4 years. I'm teaching a class on agribusiness policy and leadership, and it's kind of a hands-on class to see policy in action, how it works, and we take them to Washington, D.C. for a week and see policy in action. And something I've really enjoyed, and the students kind of challenge me all the time and maybe keep me a little bit younger because of it.
But your history, of course, have grown up on a farm. Tell me a little bit about that.
I farmed since I was 30 years old, back on the family farm, and it'll be a century farm in another year. And during the time I was there, we had a cattle feedlot for most of that time, but then now corn and soybean farmer, and starting to slow down a little bit in that side of it.
Okay, well, good. Well, glad to have you both with us today.
Good to be here.
Bob, I'm going to start out with talking about farm policy. You're teaching farm policy to students.
Right.
How is that approached, and why is that important?
Well, we got into the business of agricultural policy back in the 30s when, in the depths of the Depression, when farm family incomes were 40% of the incomes of people in the rest of the economy, and we all know how badly they were doing. So there's a desperate need to help bail out farm families. We also had the dust storms going on, so that got us started. But as agriculture has been modernized over time, it continues to be one of the riskiest businesses in the United States, with highly volatile prices, variable yields due to weather conditions from year to year. So the revenue stream can be bumped up or down by price increases or drops, or yield increases or drops. So very much the farm policy part of farm bills today is designed to be a safety net to protect farmers against precipitous drops in revenue. Farming is a very capital-intensive business today. Actually, it's more capital-intensive than the rest of the American economy. And with that kind of exposure, it's extremely difficult to sustain a business in the face of that kind of revenue volatility.
Your students that take your class, I have an inkling that not all of them will be farmers, will go back to production agriculture. What do you see that your students will take out of this class learning about farm policy? Where else will they go?
Well, I think our students are going into all parts of the food and agricultural sector, as well as some go to law school. Some take the course because of their interest in public policy more generally. Farm policy is a classic example of how the federal government gets involved in providing a safety net, not only to farmers but to consumers as well. And so Yes, more than half of my students are urban background, but they also bring some mythology about where their food comes from, and I think it's important for them to get a better understanding of the food system.
I don't know if that puts you in the category of myth buster or not, but
Some days.
on certain days. Well, let's turn our attention to the Farm Bill, as we referred to it, but more correctly, the Food, Conservation, and Energy Act of 2008. Just the title, of course, talks about that food is only a portion of that, conservation, energy, and there's a lot of things that make up the Farm Bill. We're going to go to slide number 2, that we've numbered it, and that's going to talk about how that Farm Bill is broken down. And Bob, I want to ask you to first take a look at the slide there and explain the different portions of it as far as what goes to the farm and what other things are involved.
Well, the first and most important thing is that 2/3 of the money appropriated in this Farm Bill is going for nutrition programs. We have the food stamp program, we have WIC program, we have the school lunch program, we have a new fruit and vegetable snack program for kids in schools to try and improve the quality of nutrition. So first and foremost, it is a food bill because 2/3 of the money is going directly to consumers, particularly needy consumers. Second, conservation. Farmers are the stewards of half of the land surface of the United States. And the conservation title is oriented towards helping to cost share some of the conservation practices, to retire lands that are fragile for whatever environmental reason, also to protect wetlands, wildlife habitat, and so on. All things we're concerned about as we worry about the sustainability of our whole system. And then there are resources to promote improved food safety, provide food aid to less fortunate people abroad, but also to promote development of cellulosic feedstocks for ethanol. There's no additional money for further expansion of corn-based ethanol in this Farm Bill. I think most people think that there's enough momentum there, but the focus is shifted to alternative feedstocks that perhaps can be produced on less good soils.
An interesting thing about the Farm Bill is that they multifaceted, or in the case they call it titles, to the Farm Bill. Can you give me how many titles there are?
There are 14 titles in this Farm Bill, everything from commodity programs to forestry, conservation, trade, nutrition, livestock, crop insurance.
One I like to hit is development, rural development. That's not talking about developing more farms.
No.
What is involved in the rural development title?
The rural development title is mainly oriented towards making the quality of life in rural America better, and also making rural America a more attractive place for non-farm employment. There's quite a bit of money in there for rural sewer and water systems. Historically, the Farm Bills provided the stimulus to get rural America wired for electricity and phone service. Today, the focus is on getting all people in rural America access to broadband internet service. There's also an attempt in the Farm Bill to make medical care facilities more accessible, closer to more of the rural population, to get primary care service closer to the rural residents. So, in fact, rural development is, I think, the third largest part of the budget allocation of the Farm Bill after nutrition and commodity programs.
So let me recap here for just a second. For those maybe just tuning in, we're talking about a Farm Bill. And people are thinking that we're talking about farmers, but as you've been so eloquent in pointing out, we're talking about a lot of other things than any type of just payments to farmers. What about the energy part of it? There's an energy title to the Farm Bill?
There's a lot of money for research to further develop renewable fuels, to stimulate other renewable energy sources in rural America, like windmills, solar, but also as we develop the technology to produce ethanol from cellulosic feedstocks, there is money to try and stimulate getting the pilot plants up and running to test, and also to stimulate getting the raw materials produced to test in those pilot-sized plants. So Yeah, the energy title is an important contribution to continuing to develop our alternative energy sources in the United States.
Well, you've made me catch my breath. You've expanded on so many things that the Farm Bill has. It is a very encompassing and very large piece of legislation. Ron, you've watched this being developed over the years. Is it getting more complex now than it was in the past?
Certainly more complex, but certainly I think this bill can be identified as the one in which we really see the non-farm part of this by far the largest part of the debate. In fact, as I sat and watched all this unfold and how long it's taken to get it, I think there's a couple significant factors. One is if you look at the vote and the fact that it had to override a veto. We had well over 300 votes in the House and only 15 dissenting votes in the Senate, I think, on this. What are they interested in? Food and nutrition. What are they interested in? Conservation. What are they interested in? How it's going to help rural development. Oh, and by the way, there's something out here that, according to the pie chart that you just showed, 12% of it's going to go to the traditional commodity title. Now, every editorial, whether it be the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or even the Champaign News-Gazette, has editorialized about what we should have done different in that 12% and how much money it would have saved. In reality, the reason there were so many votes for it, to override that, is because food was first and foremost. With the economy doing what it's doing, the fact of how do you get the poor people that have trouble in terms of subsistence making a living, food assistance is a good program, it's popular. And so certainly the food component of this is by far the biggest, spends the most money. And all of the things we could argue about on the quote Farm Bill side of this are relatively small in terms of number of dollars. Now, Bob and I have strong feelings about what those things ought to say. But I think we need to make sure we put this in the proper context, because most of these editorials I've read have said very little to do with the fact of what most of this bill is about.
When you think of a farm bill and you think about nutrition programs, as we said, is that the largest title? Is that where the most money goes?
Oh yeah, two-thirds of the total.
Two-thirds of it, okay. When you think of that, is it appropriate for the United States Department of Agriculture, under the auspices of a farm bill, to control that nutrition program? What are your feelings on that?
Oh, I'm sure that the Department of Health and Human Services would love to have that budget, $60 billion or so more in their budget, but no, but frankly, the Department of Agriculture really is the Department of Food, Agriculture, and Associated Natural Resources today. And I think it's appropriate that this significant part of our welfare programs, you might say, in the U.S. Resides in the USDA, because the most critical, one of the most critical purchases for low-income consumers is assurance of access to their food supply. And that's exactly the way food stamps were designed. They can only be spent on food products.
When we think about the Farm Bill providing assistance to folks that need it the most, we talk about food stability. What other things are involved in the stability of our food supply that the Farm Bill addresses? Is it just that type of thing, or are there other things involved?
Oh, stability of access is the most important thing for low-income Americans, but American agriculture needs to assure the American public of a safe, reliable, reasonably priced, nutritious food supply, and it does that by, one, providing the safety net under farm incomes, by investing a lot in research to continue reducing the unit cost of production, and that's contributed significantly to the drop in the real cost of food over time, and in fact, more often than not, we've stimulated production far in excess of domestic use. We exported about a third of what we produce today, and as a result, we have assured the American public of a very reliable and assured food supply.
It's good for them, but what about the farmers? Ron, I know you've been involved in farm policy for many years. Farmers have a very directed interest in that small portion of the Farm Bill that talks about conservation. We'll talk about that in just a second. What other groups have you seen over the years that have addressed farm policy in the Farm Bill that we might be surprised about?
Well, particularly in this one. Every year since, Dr. Thompson was involved in the Farm Bill back in the 80s, every year we've seen more outside groups become engaged and involved. And you look at where the resources are going, follow the dollars. You look at where the resources are going, obviously indicates where some of those interests are coming from. And certainly food groups are very, very strong. Food safety, in terms of the welfare aspect of it, in terms of, there's now organic programs in there, and how do we handle those? All of these are engaged in a way far greater than they have before. And then the environmental and conservation groups, very, very significant part. So all of these have been over from Farm Bill to Farm Bill. We have been increasing the movement to these outside groups having more influence. And again, that's where I go back to the vote that was taken this time and how extremely big it was, because most of those are not representing agricultural districts. If you look at the number of congressmen that represent agricultural districts, I've forgotten the number, you may know, Bob, but it's not very many.
But it's pretty small,
Yeah,
isn't it?
not over 35 out of 435 members of the House of
35,
Representatives have enough farmers in their district to really worry about in their next reelection campaign.
Yeah, makes a big difference.
That's why the Farm Bill has to be a food conservation and environment bill.
Haven't I heard
Happens
the
by
word omnibus, or there's some big word that they use that kind of encompasses everything. Well, food is pretty obvious. That's pretty easy for the consumers that are watching our program today to know that I'm concerned about my food and the stability and the safety of it and the cost of it. But one that they might not think about that will also affect them is the conservation programs that farmers put in place to protect our land, our natural resources, and our water. We're going to go to slide number 3. Slide number 3 is going to put some pictures up there that, Ron, as a farmer, what on earth are we looking at? We're just looking now at the back 40. Why is that possibly important to the consumer?
Well, you just look at the one that says a strip along the stream bank stabilization. As we said through the Clean Water Act and many other sources, that we want to maintain clean water and improve clean water. We've gone through, since the 70s, all the point source pollution avenues have been brought into regulation, and now there's a lot of focus on the non-point source of that. And so in terms of the public has been very much concerned, okay, how do we have clean air, how do we have clean water, and the environmental aspects. And so since farmers are the largest single owner, private owner of land in the U.S., that the private sector, they're saying, okay, what are you doing out there on the farm? And they have been concerned about this for a number of years, but certainly the level of concern has increased. And so those kinds of programs have been very extremely important to the non-farm voters.
So you're telling me that picture we saw there a second ago that had the stream going through the farm, that has a relationship to the water that comes out the tap at my kitchen faucet, whether it's a small town in rural America or a larger municipality like a Champaign-Urbana, Danville, Decatur, that type of thing? How are those tied together?
Well, obviously, if you look at how we maintain the water quality, you take when you've got filter strips like that, you filter out. First of all, it doesn't allow the sediments to get into the stream. That carries with it nutrients and other things with it. Secondly, as you look at the roots of the plants that are growing there, they take up some of the nitrogen or phosphorus of other plants that are other nutrients that are growing there. And third, as we look at crop protection chemicals that we use, then they serve as a filter for that as well. So it has shown unequivocally that it does work. And farmers have been, again, very willing to adopt those kinds of technologies or uses. And what this has said, but it's a public sector that gains the benefit. So they ought to share in the cost of doing it as well.
Of course, farmers live on the land. They enjoy the environment out there. Bob, aren't farmers also, where do they get their water? Where does that come from? Why should they be concerned about those conservation programs?
They get their water out of a well on their farm. Obviously, they don't want their family to be drinking water that's any less pure and safe than anybody else's family. So, farmers were the original conservationists of taking care of their soil in wanting to protect clean water. So the Department of Agriculture is a major player in protecting not only our soil and our water. They manage more of the nation's forests than the National Park Service. And in fact, every time you see on the evening news the fire jumpers or the planes dropping water, that's part of USDA. The Forest Service is another chunk of this budget that we haven't even talked about. So it's a very broad environmental involvement that the USDA has.
I want to go back to our slide for just a second, because we talked about the picture up in the top right-hand corner of our slide, and we're going to go back to that here in just a second, which was more or less a stream, an open ditch, an open water source, you might say. But if we take a look at that slide once again, you see down in the bottom left-hand corner, I see no water there. I see nothing, but is that a golf course?
It's a
what is that? What does that do for that field?
Waterways is a matter of guiding the water down to, if I'm seeing it right, looks like guiding the water down to wherever outlets into it. So basically, again, it's allowing the water that's on a slope there to run into the stream where it's eventually going to outlet. And again, it doesn't take any sediment with it because it's got a grass that's holding the soil there, and it allows it to get there again in terms of a clean way, in a clean manner, and keep the streams clear. Also, as you look up through there, it looks to me like there could possibly be some terraces up there. I can't tell for sure. Again, but all of that is to hold the soil in place, keep it out on the land where we cherish that good black soil, and not allow it to get into the streams.
Now, as farmers farm their soil every year and they have slope or flatlands, whatever, does that soil, is it used up? Does it go away? You know, people may wonder, every year you grow a crop, does the soil go away? Is that what's going on?
No, and absolutely, that's what we're trying to prevent. We maintain their soil. Nobody feels stronger about the soil on their farm than we do as farmers. It is what we need to have and use, and certainly it's feel a very strong attachment to it. And as we do that, we need to keep that soil, which we've been blessed with rich soils here in central Illinois. And we want to keep them on the farm where we can do that. Now, there are nutrients we have to add to provide the crops everything they need, but basically it's that soil that has a water holding capacity to feed the plants and nourish it throughout the year that we need out there. And so farmers are saying, I want that rich top black soil on my farm, and I want to keep it there.
Ron, we've talked about the reasons farmers are interested in what the Farm Bill had to do. Bob, as you talk to your students and you talk with other educators, what are their interest in the Farm Bill? Do they even care, or are you able to instill in them the importance of the Farm Bill oversight?
Well, I think part of the mythology that students often bring is they have no concept of the range of things that the Farm Bills authorize, or the range of things in which the Department of Agriculture is involved. When they hear Farm Bill, they think it's something that happens on the farm or maybe subsidizes farmers, and they might know a little bit about USDA research because we are a land-grant university. But beyond that, I don't think there's much comprehension across our broader society, and which our students increasingly represent today.
As you see the Farm Bill developed, if it is so important, where does all the data come from? How do our legislators make decisions? Or maybe our people watching today, how can they be an influence about the importance of keeping agriculture to the forefront of productivity?
Well, they certainly need to support research to keep productivity growing. The private sector is doing more and more of our research, but the public sector continues to play a very important role, because there are some areas of research the private sector is not going to be able to get a return on their investment. So that's a very important area, as is, of course, just food safety and inspection, both to inspect imports of food as well as to ensure the safety of the food supply through meat inspection and so on. So the Department of Agriculture really has its hand in every aspect of our food supply.
Do you see some of your students going on to be employed by agencies like the Department of Agriculture, or possibly some of the legislative branches of government to influence this policy?
Well, of course. Out of our graduates, they're going into all different types of agencies in the Department of Agriculture, from soil conservation, natural resources more generally, food safety inspection service, administration of farm programs, they get involved in the whole range of food, agriculture, and associated natural resources issues.
Ron, you have students in your class too. How do they react to the Farm Bill and its policies?
Well, it was interesting this year because both Bob and I got an opportunity to follow this all the way through, as it was a story you couldn't make up because it all got to be too much beyond what was believable. But certainly as we look at those, the students there, regardless of where you go, you're going to be impacted by public policy. And what we try to teach them is saying that you're going to be influenced, particularly during the agricultural industry, about what happens here. This is important. But not only Farm Bill, but the whole policy arena. You cannot just do it, go out and say, I'm going to work in a business, and that doesn't matter. It does matter. It matters how we operate and how we do things. So I think it's useful to them as well.
Well, you know, agriculture is not unique to the United States of America. Other countries, other governments have to be concerned about agriculture. Are there farm bills? What's the governmental policy in some of our other agricultural countries?
Well, and I'd like for Bob to touch a little bit because he is such an international agricultural economist and expert. But there's a trade component to this Farm Bill. And one of the things we've not talked about is how does this fit in, what we've passed here, to the trade negotiations we got, and how does it fit in to what we need to be doing in terms of opening up the markets and allowing free trade. And I think that it'd be worth some comments by Bob to talk a little bit about that.
Tell us, I'm anxious to hear what other countries are doing and their farm policy.
Well, the European Union and Japan, the other highest income countries of the world, do a lot of subsidizing of their farmers. They provided very high levels of protection over time to their to farm incomes, and as a result, many cases they've stimulated overproduction in excess of what is either economically efficient or environmentally sustainable. And it's caught up with them, for example, in Europe, where they've caused some significant environmental problems as a result of overstimulating their farm production. They have a very dense population, and as a result, they're cutting back significantly on the level of support to agriculture. They've also cut back on research investments. So we have, in many of the high-income countries, a tradition of some fairly significant subsidies to farmers, whereas in the low-income countries of the world, in many cases, governments respond principally to consumers in the cities, and farmers are out in the country forgotten. They're not organized, they don't have farm organizations to represent them, and so those governments actually artificially depress the price of food in the cities to keep the urban consumers happy, but that ripples all the way back down through the marketing system, depresses farmers' incentive to produce, and so those countries generally underproduce relative to what would be economically efficient or environmentally sustainable. But right now in the world trade negotiations, we're trying to bring this into balance to reduce the excessive stimulus to agriculture in some of the high-income countries and if you will, increase the incentive to farmers in low-income countries, create a more level playing field is the bottom line.
Isn't it interesting how one industry that affects everyone, we all eat 3, 4, 5 times a day in some cases, is affected by a minority of a workforce. What's it, 2% in the United States? Where are we at now? Something
Less
like
than
that.
2%.
Less than 2%
Less than
now?
2%.
Significantly less.
35,000 farmers produce half the output in the country.
Wow, fantastic. Well, that's why the debate is so great, and that's why we want to thank you fellows for taking the time to talk about the Farm Bill today, and we appreciate it. And we appreciate you for your time. I wish we had more time to talk about this. As you can tell, it's a very important piece of legislation. It's something that affects consumers, it affects folks that need help with their food dollars, and it also affects farmers out there on the land. So we hope you'll tune in again next time when we once again have a chance to tell you what's going on here in Champaign County Agriculture Today. I'm Dennis Riggs. Thank you so much for listening.
Champaign County Agriculture Today is brought to you by Champaign County Farm Bureau.